The morning sun of Thandros Prime cast long shadows across the Imperial Academy's corridors. Ji-won Kim walked quietly among the crowd of alien students, her simple uniform marking her as just another cadet. She kept her eyes down, her black hair tied in a neat braid. Around her, students from dozens of worlds laughed and talked in languages that filled the air like music. The academy stood on a neutral moon, far from any homeworld. Here the children of the galaxy's greatest warriors came to learn about war. The buildings were massive, built from white stone that seemed to glow. Holographic displays floated in every hallway, showing famous battles from across the stars. Ji-won had been here for 6 months now. She still felt like an outsider. Humans were new to the Galactic Confederation. Only 180 years had passed since Earth joined the community of worlds. To species that counted their histories in thousands of years, humans were children. She entered the lecture hall for Military History 401. The room could hold 300 students. Today, all the seats were filled. At the front stood Corporal Instructor Velthar, a Kryn warrior with 4 arms and ceremonial scars covering his face. His species had conquered 12 systems before joining the Confederation peacefully. Every Kryn was born a warrior. "Sit down, all of you," Velthar's voice boomed. "Today, we begin the most important unit of your training." Ji-won found her usual seat in the back row. Next to her sat Mirai Park, her roommate and the only other human in the class. Mirai smiled nervously. She always worried about their grades. "In 3 weeks you will face your most difficult examination," Velthar continued. "You must identify the greatest military leaders in galactic history. Their faces, their campaigns, their impact on warfare itself." A holographic image appeared above the instructor. It showed a massive alien with 6 eyes and armor that seemed made of living metal. "This is Battle Lord Zorath of the Kryn Empire. He unified 40 worlds under one banner. 3,000 years ago, his tactics are still studied today." More images followed. Each one showed a different species, a different time. The Silicate Hive Mind Conductor, who commanded 1 billion warriors as one. The Vrexian Emperor General Torak, who had never lost a battle in 60 years of war. Toran, a Vrexian student sitting in the front row, stood up proudly when his ancestor appeared. His blue skin gleamed in the light. "My great-grandfather's grandfather," he announced. "A true leader," Velthar nodded with approval. "The Vrexian Empire has given the galaxy many lessons in warfare." The lecture continued for 2 hours. Every major species had their time, their heroes, their legends. Ji-won took notes quietly, her fingers moving across her data pad. Then Velthar reached the human section. "And now we come to the newest members of our confederation," he said. His tone changed. It became dismissive, almost bored. Humanity joined us only 180 years ago. Before that, they had barely left their own solar system. A single image appeared. It showed a human in an ancient spacesuit standing on Earth's moon. "This is from their early space exploration. Primitive chemical rockets. No faster than light travel. No energy shields," some students laughed. Torin spoke loudly enough for everyone to hear. "What could such a species teach us about war? They were still using explosives and metal bullets while we were crossing galaxies." More laughter filled the room. Ji-won's hands tightened on her datapad. Her knuckles turned white. Mirai glanced at her with concern, but Ji-won kept her face blank. Velthar showed a few more images. Human soldiers from different eras. They fought each other more than they fought external threats. Constant wars on their home planet, very primitive. He waved one hand dismissively. "The human section of your exam will be simple. Perhaps 1 or 2 questions." The hologram disappeared. Velthar looked across the room with all 4 of his eyes. "You have 3 weeks to prepare. The exam will test everything you have learned. I will show you one image of an ancient chieftain or commander. You must tell me who they are, what species, what they accomplished, and why they matter to military history." He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. "If you fail, you will repeat this entire course. Your military career will be delayed by a full year. Your families will know of your shame." The room fell silent. Even Torin stopped smiling. "You are dismissed. Study well." Students began filing out of the room. Conversations started immediately. Groups formed, students from the same species clustering together to share notes and study plans. Mirai touched Ji-won's arm. "Are you okay?" Ji-won stood up slowly. She gathered her things without speaking. Her face remained calm, but something burned behind her eyes. Jiwon. I'm fine, Jiwon said quietly. I need to go to the archive. The archive? But we should study together. Make flashcards of all those leaders and you study your way. I'll study mine. Mireille watched her friend walk away. She had known Jiwon for 6 months now. They shared a small room in the human quarters. Jiwon never talked much about her family back on New Seoul, the colony world where she grew up. She never complained about the way other students treated humans. She just worked hard, stayed quiet, and kept to herself. But Mireille had learned to read the small signs. The way Jiwon's jaw tightened when someone mocked humanity. The way her eyes grew distant when instructors dismissed human achievements. Something was different today. Something had changed. In the hallway outside, Torin gathered his Vrexian friends. 3 weeks to memorize the great leaders of galactic history, he said loudly. At least we don't have to waste time on the human section. What are they going to show us? A picture of someone with a metal gun? His friends laughed. They walked past Jiwon without noticing her standing in the shadows. Jiwon watched them go. Then she turned and headed toward the Academy's archive of conflicts. The massive library stood at the center of campus. It held records of every major war fought by every species in the Confederation, battles that shaped civilizations, strategies that changed the course of history. She had been there many times before, but tonight she would look for something specific, something the other students didn't know about, something the instructors had never bothered to teach. The archive's doors opened before her. Inside, millions of records waited in the darkness. Holographic displays glowed softly, showing the organized chaos of galactic military history. Jiwon walked past the Kryn section with its proud displays, past the Vrexian wing with its towering statues, past the central areas where most students spent their time. She headed for the back corner, the place where dust gathered, the section that few people ever visited, the human military history section. It was small, just a few shelves compared to the massive collections other species maintained. The Confederation had requested basic records when humanity joined. Earth had sent what was asked for. Nothing more. Nothing less. But Jiwon knew something others didn't. She knew that the official histories only told part of the story. She knew that humanity's military past went deeper than 3 pages in a textbook. She knew because someone had told her. Someone who remembered Jiwon sat down at a terminal in the empty section. She entered her access code and began to search. Not for the famous names that everyone knew. Not for the simple overview that Velthar had dismissed. She searched for the truth. The real history. The records that explained why humans fought the way they did. Why they never gave up. Why they kept standing when everyone else would fall. Her fingers moved across the screen. Files opened. Documents appeared. Images from wars fought centuries ago on a distant planet called Earth. And slowly, in the quiet darkness of the archive, Jiwon began to understand what the test really meant. What she needed to find. What she needed to remember. 3 weeks. She had 3 weeks to prepare, but she wasn't preparing to memorize names and dates like the other students. She was preparing to teach the galaxy a lesson they had forgotten. The lesson that warriors weren't always the ones who conquered the most worlds. Sometimes the greatest warriors were the ones who simply refused to let go of the ground beneath their feet. The archive of conflicts never truly slept. Even in the deep hours of Thandros Prime's night cycle, holographic displays flickered with information. Students came and went at all hours, desperate to absorb centuries of military knowledge. But the human section remained empty. Always empty. Jiwon had claimed it as her own territory. For 2 weeks, she spent every evening there after her regular classes ended, while other students gathered in study groups, practicing the identification of famous generals and conquerors. She sat alone among dusty records of Earth's military past. Mireille tried to convince her to join the group study sessions. Everyone is working together. Even species that don't like each other are sharing notes. You're isolating yourself. I know what I'm doing, Jiwon had replied. Now, with 1 week left before the examination, Jiwon understood things that weren't in the official textbooks. She had read about wars fought with primitive weapons, conflicts that lasted years, decades, generations. She learned about soldiers who held positions against impossible odds, about civilians who became warriors when their homes were threatened. The Confederation measured military greatness in conquered systems and subjugated populations. They celebrated generals who expanded empires and commanders who won decisive victories with overwhelming force. Earth's history was different. Humanity's wars were smaller in scale but deeper in meaning. They fought for ideas, for survival, for freedom. The records showed a pattern. When humans should have surrendered, they didn't. When retreat was the logical choice, they stood firm. One evening, an old man appeared in the human section. Ji-won looked up from her reading to find him watching her with kind eyes. He was human, perhaps 70 years old, with gray hair and simple clothing. "You've been here every night for 2 weeks," he said. "I'm Sebin Han. I'm the keeper of the human archives." Ji-won stood respectfully. "I didn't know we had a dedicated keeper." Sebin smiled sadly. "Most species don't need one. Their sections are popular. Students visit constantly. But humans?" He gestured at the empty space around them. "You're the first student to spend serious time here in 3 years. I'm studying for the examination." "I know. I've been watching what you read." Sabin moved closer, his voice dropping to a whisper. "You're not studying the same way as the others, are you?" Ji-won hesitated. Then she shook her head. "Good," Sebin said. He pulled out a data chip from his pocket. "The Confederation asked for basic military records when Earth joined. We gave them what they asked for. Names, dates, major conflicts. Simple summaries." He held up the chip. "But we didn't give them everything. We didn't give them the details. The personal accounts. The true stories of what our soldiers endured and accomplished. I've been keeping those records here in the restricted archive, waiting for someone who cared enough to look." "Why?" Ji-won asked. "Because the other species don't understand. They see our wars as primitive because we fought with metal bullets instead of plasma. They dismiss our tactics because we didn't conquer other worlds." Sebin's eyes grew intense. "They don't understand what it means to fight when extinction is the only alternative. When you have no advanced technology to save you. When victory depends entirely on the will to keep fighting." He handed her the data chip. "This contains untranslated records, first-hand accounts, battle reports written by soldiers who were there, real military history, not the sanitized version." Ji-won took the chip carefully. "What's in here?" "Everything they should have taught in that classroom. The Korean War, Vietnam, the resource wars. Conflicts where humans faced overwhelming odds and refused to break." He paused. "There's also something else. Personal military service records. Every soldier who served from 1950 to the present day. Millions of names. Their stories." That night, alone in her dormitory room while Mirai slept, Ji-won inserted the data chip into her personal terminal. Files appeared on the screen. Thousands of them. Decades of military service preserved in careful detail. She began reading randomly. A pilot who flew missions over ancient cities. A medic who saved lives under enemy fire. A young officer who led troops through jungle terrain without proper supplies. Then she saw a folder that made her hands freeze over the keyboard. Kim Dynasty, Military Service Records. 1950-2847, her family name. Her bloodline. Ji-won's heart pounded as she opened the file. Names appeared. Kim Tae-jin, Kim So-hyuk, Kim Dae-an, Kim Ji-yeon. Generation after generation. Every member of her family who had served in the military. She knew her family had a tradition of service. Her father had been a soldier. Her grandmother had mentioned that her grandfather fought in an old war. But Ji-won had never seen the records. Never knew the details. She clicked on the oldest name. Kim Tae-jin, born 1931, enlisted 1949. Service, Korean People's Army, 2nd Infantry Division. A photograph appeared on the screen. It was black and white, clearly ancient by modern standards. The image showed a young man, 19 years old, wearing a military uniform that predated spaceflight by decades. He stood at attention, a rifle slung over his shoulder. Behind him, a barren hillside and other soldiers in similar uniforms. His eyes stared directly at the camera. Young eyes, but fierce with determination. The eyes of someone who had seen things that aged the soul. Ji-won read his service record slowly. Posted to the Chosin Reservoir. Served during the winter campaign of 1950. Temperatures reaching -35 degrees Celsius. Engaged in defensive operations against numerically superior forces. She found more details in the attached files. The Battle of Chosin Reservoir, 30,000 UN forces, including 15,000 US Marines and Korean soldiers, surrounded by 120,000 enemy troops. Fighting in frozen mountains, equipment failing in the cold. Supplies running low, the battle lasted 17 days. Jiwan read accounts from soldiers who were there. They wrote about the cold that froze weapons, about friends who died from exposure, about positions that had to be held even when every logical calculation said retreat was the only option. The surrounded forces didn't surrender. They fought their way out. Every mile was paid for in blood. Every position was held until the last possible moment. The military historians called it one of the most harrowing operations in the history of warfare. Kim Tae-jin survived. The record showed he lived to be 94 years old. He married, had children, grandchildren, eventually great-grandchildren. One of those great-grandchildren was Ji-won. She found more files, letters he had written, interviews recorded when he was old. In one audio file, his aged voice spoke about the war. The hardest thing about Chosin wasn't the cold or the enemy, he said. It was watching my friends die while wondering if anyone would remember their names. If anyone would remember that we stood there, that we held that frozen ground. Ji-won listened to the recording 3 times. Then she sat in the darkness staring at the photograph of her grandfather at 19 years old. He looked so young, so determined, standing on a frozen hillside with nothing but a rifle and the will to protect the ground beneath his feet. The academy taught that great military leaders were the ones who conquered worlds, who expanded empires, who won glorious victories with superior technology and overwhelming force. But Kim Tae-jin hadn't conquered any worlds. He had simply stood his ground when standing seemed impossible. He had survived when survival required more than technology or tactics. It required pure, stubborn human will. Ji-won spent the rest of the night reading more records. She found other battles, other soldiers. Different wars, different eras, but the same pattern repeated. Humans defending positions they shouldn't have been able to hold. Winning battles they should have lost. Surviving situations that should have killed them. Not through superior technology. Not through brilliant strategy. But through sheer refusal to give up. When morning came, Mirai woke to find Ji-won still sitting at her terminal. Did you sleep at all? No. Ji-won, you need to rest. The exam is in 5 days. Ji-won finally turned away from the screen. Her eyes were red from reading, but they burned with something new. Something fierce. I'm ready, she said. Mirai looked at her friend with concern. Ready for what? Ji-won didn't answer. She stood up and began preparing for the day's classes. But inside she carried the weight of a revelation. She finally understood what the examination really meant. Velthar would show them images of ancient chieftains and famous commanders. He expected students to recite memorized facts about conquests and campaigns. But Ji-won knew something the instructor didn't. She knew that the computer system contained every military record humanity had ever submitted to the Confederation. Millions of names, millions of soldiers. The algorithm would select randomly from all historical military personnel. It might select a famous general, or it might select an ordinary soldier, someone whose name meant nothing to galactic history, someone whose significance was measured in different terms. Someone like Kim Tae-jin Ji-won went through her classes that day in a daze. While other students frantically reviewed their notes, she remained calm. Mirai kept asking if she was feeling well. I'm fine, Ji-won kept saying. I know exactly what I need to know. That evening, she returned to the archive one last time. Seben was waiting for her in the human section. Did you find what you needed? He asked. Ji-won nodded. My grandfather. Kim Tae-jin. He fought at the Chosan Reservoir. The examination hall stood at the center of the Imperial Academy, built from the same white stone that seemed to glow in Thandros Prime's early light. 200 cadets from across the galaxy gathered outside the massive doors, their nervous energy filling the air like static before a storm. Ji-won stood apart from the main crowd. She wore her dress uniform, pressed and perfect. Her hair was tied back in the same simple braid she always wore. Her face showed no emotion, no fear. No doubt, Mirai pushed through the crowd to reach her. There you are. I've been looking everywhere. Are you ready? Yes. I'm terrified, Mirai admitted. I stayed up all night reviewing. Phyrexian generals, Kryn battlelords, the Silicate commanders. There's so much to remember. Other students clustered in groups according to their species. The Phyrexians stood together, tall and blue-skinned, reviewing their own empire's glorious history. The Kryn practiced their ceremonial postures, The silicates communicated in rapid clicking sounds that only they understood. Turan noticed Jiwan standing alone and walked over with his friends. "The human," he said loudly. "Still planning to take the exam? I heard the human section is so easy you might actually pass." His friends laughed. One of them spoke in heavily accented standard. "Maybe they'll show you a picture of one of your ancient warriors. Someone with a metal stick and animal skins." More laughter. Jiwan met Toran's eyes but said nothing. Her silence seemed to irritate him more than any response would have. "Nothing to say? No defense of your primitive species?" "I'll speak when I have something worth saying," Jiwan replied quietly. Before Toran could respond, the examination hall doors opened. Corporal Instructor Velthar stood in the entrance. All four of his arms crossed over his chest. His scarred face was unreadable. "Enter. Find your assigned station. The examination begins in 10 minutes. Anyone who is late will automatically fail." The crowd surged forward. Inside, the hall was arranged with 200 individual stations, each one separated by privacy screens. At each station sat a chair, a display terminal, and a recording device. Jiwan found her assigned number. Station 147. She sat down and waited. Velthar's voice echoed through the hall. "Today you will prove whether you deserve to continue your military education. The rules are simple. An image will appear on your display. You have 5 minutes to identify the military leader shown. You must provide their name, species, era, major campaigns, and lasting impact on galactic warfare." He paused, letting the weight settle over the students. "The selection is random. The computer has chosen from the complete military historical database. You may receive an easy identification. You may receive an extremely difficult one. That is the nature of true military intelligence. You must be prepared for anything." Jiwan's hands rested calmly in her lap. Around her, she could hear other students breathing heavily. Some whispered prayers in their native languages. "You will go in alphabetical order by surname. When your name is called, proceed to the identification chamber. The rest of you will wait here in silence. Any attempt to communicate or access outside information will result in immediate failure and expulsion from the academy." The first name was called. A Kryn student stood on shaky legs and walked toward the chamber at the front of the hall. The doors closed behind him. On the wall, a timer appeared. 5 minutes. Everyone watched as the seconds ticked down. When the timer reached 0, the doors opened. The Kryn student emerged, his face unreadable. He returned to his station without speaking. The next name was called. Then another. The process was slow and deliberate. Success or failure showed only on the students' faces as they emerged. Some looked relieved. Others looked devastated. Mireille's name came after an hour. She stood up, gave Jiwan one last nervous look, and walked to the chamber. 5 minutes later, she returned with a weak smile. She had passed. Barely. More names. More students. The examination continued through the morning. Toran was called. He strutted to the chamber with confidence. When he emerged 5 minutes later, he was practically glowing with pride. He had obviously succeeded, probably identifying one of his own species' famous commanders. The afternoon wore on. Jiwan waited patiently while other students came and went. Some failed. She watched them leave the hall immediately, their military careers delayed by a full year. Finally, 3 hours into the examination, her name echoed through the hall. Cadet Jiwan Kim. She stood. Every movement was precise and controlled. She walked down the aisle toward the identification chamber. She could feel eyes on her back. The human. One of only 2 in the entire class. How would she perform? The chamber doors opened. She stepped inside. The doors closed behind her with a soft hiss. The room was small and dark. A single chair faced a large display screen. Above, she knew observation windows allowed the instructors to watch. She couldn't see them, but she felt their presence. Jiwan sat down, her back straight, her hands folded in her lap. Belthar's voice came from hidden speakers. "Cadet Kim, your identification will begin in 10 seconds. You have 5 minutes. Speak clearly for the recording." The display screen glowed. 10, 9, 8. Jiwan's heart beat steadily. She had prepared for this moment, not by memorizing lists of famous generals like the other students, but by understanding something deeper, something true. 3, 2, 1. The screen illuminated fully. An image appeared. It was a photograph, black and white, clearly ancient by galactic standards. The image quality was poor compared to modern holographic displays. But the subject was clear, a young Asian man in a military uniform. He stood at attention, a rifle slung over his shoulder. Behind him, a barren hillside and other soldiers. His eyes stared directly at the camera with fierce determination. The uniform was marked with insignia that predated human spaceflight by centuries. The equipment was primitive, metal and cloth instead of energy fields and advanced materials. Jiwan stared at the image. For a long moment she didn't speak. The chamber was absolutely silent. Then, quietly, she began. "This is not a chieftain." In the observation room, Velthar leaned forward. "Incorrect identification results in..." But Jiwan continued, her voice growing stronger. "This is Private Kim Taejin, Korean People's Army, 2nd Infantry Division. He fought in the Battle of Chosin Reservoir. Earth year 1950, silence. Complete silence." Other instructors in the observation room exchanged confused looks. The name meant nothing to them. They had never heard of this battle. This soldier, Jiwan's voice filled the chamber. Private Kim was 19 years old when this photograph was taken. He and his unit were deployed to a frozen mountain reservoir in the northern part of his homeland. The temperature dropped to minus 35 degrees Celsius. Equipment failed in the cold. Weapons froze. Men died from exposure. She spoke calmly, as if reciting facts everyone should know. 30,000 UN forces, including 15,000 US Marines and Korean soldiers, were surrounded by 120,000 enemy troops. The force should have been destroyed. Military logic said surrender was the only option. Veltar's voice interrupted. "Cadet Kim, this examination is to identify significance to galactic military history. What is this soldier's relevance to..." "He held his ground," Jiwan said, her voice cutting through the instructor's objection. "For 17 days in temperatures that would kill most species in this confederation within hours, he held his ground. He had no energy shields, no plasma weapons, no orbital support, just a metal rifle that could freeze and stop working, just the uniform on his back, just his will to protect the position he was given." Her hands remained folded calmly, but her eyes burned with intensity. The surrounded forces fought their way out. Every mile cost lives. Every position was paid for in blood. They inflicted severe casualties on an enemy force 4 times their size. Military historians would later call it one of the most harrowing operations in warfare history. In the observation room, more instructors gathered. Word was spreading that something unusual was happening in the examination chamber. A human student was identifying an unknown soldier with perfect detail. Private Kim Taejin survived the battle, Jiwon continued. He lived to be 94 years old. He married, had children, grandchildren, great-grandchildren. When he was old, he gave interviews about the war. He said the hardest thing about that battle wasn't the cold or the enemy. It was watching his friends die while wondering if anyone would remember their names. She paused, then looked directly at where she knew the observation window was located, even though she couldn't see through it. "You asked me to identify an ancient chieftain, Instructor Velthar. You expected me to name some famous general who conquered worlds, who built empires, who won glorious victories with superior technology." Her voice remained calm but carried weight that filled the chamber. "But you're not showing me a chieftain. You're showing me something the Confederation has forgotten how to value. You're showing me a warrior who stood his ground when standing was all he had, who fought with primitive weapons against impossible odds, who survived through nothing but pure human will." She took a breath. "You're showing me my grandfather." The words hung in the air like a physical presence. In the observation room, chaos erupted. Instructors spoke rapidly in multiple languages. How could this be? The selection was random. The Council of Instructors met in a chamber that overlooked the Academy's main courtyard. 15 military educators from across the Confederation sat in a circle, their faces showing various degrees of confusion and anger. At the center stood Velthar, pacing with all 4 arms, gesturing wildly. "She should fail," he insisted. The examination was clear. Identify significance to galactic military history. This soldier conquered no worlds, led no fleets, founded no empires. He is nobody. He has a service record, another instructor pointed out. This was Nam, headmaster of the academy and the highest-ranking human in the institution. She was 60 years old, her hair gray, her uniform decorated with medals from conflicts most species had forgotten. The computer selected from all submitted military records. The cadet identified correctly. A technicality, Velthar snapped. The spirit of the examination is to test knowledge of important military figures, not random foot soldiers from primitive conflicts. Other instructors murmured agreement. A silicate representative clicked rapidly. The human military records are inappropriately detailed. Other species submitted command-level personnel only. Earth submitted millions of individual service members. This skews the random selection. Earth was asked to submit complete military records, Curie said calmly. We complied. Every soldier who served from 1950 to the present. That is what was requested. Because we assumed you would follow standard protocol, the silicate responded. Command staff. Notable officers. Not every single infantry private. Perhaps, Curie said, other species should reconsider what makes a soldier notable. Velthar slammed one fist on the council table. This is not about philosophy. This is about academic standards. The cadet identified an irrelevant soldier through personal connection, not through proper study. She also provided detailed tactical information about the battle, another instructor noted. The chosen reservoir engagement. I reviewed the records after the examination. Her facts were accurate. Facts about an insignificant battle on a backwater planet, Velthar countered. At that moment, the chamber doors opened. Archive Keeper Sieben entered, carrying a data tablet. He bowed respectfully to the council. Forgive the interruption, honored instructors. I was called to provide testimony about the human military records. Yes, the silicate instructor said. Explain why your species submitted millions of individual service records instead of following standard practice. Sabin stood before the council, his old eyes calm. When humanity applied to join the Confederation, we were given specific instructions. Submit complete military historical records. We interpreted complete to mean exactly that. Every soldier, every service member, every person who wore a uniform and swore to defend something greater than themselves. Other species submitted command-level officers. Velthar said impatiently. Yes, because other species measure military significance by rank and conquest. Sebin looked around the council. Humanity measures it differently. We believe every soldier who serves has significance. Every person who stands in defense of their people matters, from the highest general to the lowest private. That is a cultural perspective, not a military standard, the silicate insisted. Is it? Sebin pulled up information on his tablet. Let me provide context for Private Kim Tajan's battle. 30,000 soldiers surrounded by 120,000 enemy troops. Temperatures at -35 Celsius. No advanced technology. No reinforcements immediately available. Standard military doctrine from every species in this confederation would dictate immediate surrender. He projected tactical maps into the air. The council watched as the battle played out in holographic form. These surrounded forces fought for 17 days. They inflicted casualties at a ratio of nearly 1-to-1 despite being outnumbered 4-to-1. They broke through encirclement lines and extracted their forces with most personnel surviving. The enemy forces never recovered from the damage sustained. The maps showed the impossible fighting retreat. The defensive positions held against overwhelming odds. The pure, stubborn refusal to break. Now tell me, honored instructors, is this not significant? Is this not worth studying? Just because it happened on Earth? Just because it involved soldiers with primitive equipment? Silence fell over the council. Several instructors shifted uncomfortably. Headmaster Curie stood. I would like to add something. When humanity joined the Confederation 180 years ago, we were dismissed as irrelevant, a species that had barely left its own solar system. What could we possibly contribute? She walked to the center of the council circle. 60 years ago, the Vrexian expansion threatened Confederation core worlds. The Vrexian fleet was unstoppable. They had superior numbers and technology. Standard military analysis predicted defeat. Do you remember who held the line at New Sol? One Vrexian instructor spoke reluctantly. Human colonial forces. Yes, human soldiers with inferior equipment facing a technologically superior enemy refused to retreat. They held their positions for 6 weeks until reinforcements arrived. The Vrexian expansion was stopped. Curie's eyes swept the council. 20 years ago, when the silicate plague required ground forces willing to fight in toxic atmospheres, who volunteered? Humans. When the Kryn asked for soldiers who could endure high-gravity worlds, who answered? Humans, she paused. We are not the oldest species, not the strongest, not the most advanced, but we learned something during our long history of fighting on one small planet. We learned how to endure. We learned that technology and numbers don't always determine victory. Sometimes pure will is enough. Velthar's voice was quieter now, but still resistant. That does not change the fact that this examination was compromised. The random selection chose the cadet's own ancestor. That is beyond unlikely. It borders on manipulation. The odds were indeed low, Sebin admitted, but not impossible. Millions of human service records exist in the database. The cadet has dozens of ancestors who served in various conflicts. The random selection could have chosen any of them. It chose Private Kim Tajin. Convenient, Velthar muttered. Perhaps, Curie said softly. Or perhaps the universe has a sense of irony. You wanted to test these cadets on ancient chieftains, to see if they could identify significance. Cadet Ji-won Kim identified the significance perfectly. She explained the tactical situation, the historical context, and the lasting impact. She did exactly what was required. She did more than required, another instructor noted. She taught us something about measuring military significance in ways we had forgotten. The debate continued for another hour. Some instructors insisted Ji-won should fail on principle. Others argued that technically, she had met all examination requirements. A few, mostly from species that had fought alongside humans, quietly supported her. Finally, Headmaster Curie called for a vote. Cadet Ji-won Kim's examination performance, pass or fail. The council voted. It was close, but in the end, 11 instructors voted to pass. 4 voted to fail. The decision is made, Curie announced. Cadet Kim passes with full marks. Velthar stood abruptly. This is a mistake. You are setting a precedent that personal connections override proper military scholarship. No, Curie said firmly. We are setting a precedent that military significance is measured in more than conquered territory. That warriors come in many forms. That sometimes the most important lessons come from the soldiers who simply held their ground. She looked at Velthar directly. Perhaps, instructor, the lesson here was not for the students. Perhaps it was for us. Velthar stormed from the council chambers without another word. The other instructors filed out slowly, discussing the implications in hushed tones. Sebin remained behind with Curie. That was not easy, the old keeper said. It shouldn't have been necessary, Curie replied. But we are a young species in this confederation, still proving ourselves, still teaching them that we belong here. The girl did well. She honored her grandfather's memory. She did more than that. She reminded the Confederation why humanity matters. Curie looked out the window at the academy grounds below, where cadets from dozens of worlds trained together. We don't have the biggest empire. We don't have the longest history, but we have something they had forgotten. We have the will to stand when everyone else would fall. News of the council's decision spread quickly through the academy. By evening, every student knew what had happened. The human cadet who identified her own grandfather. The examination that became a lesson about significance and legacy. Reactions were mixed. Some students were inspired. Others were dismissive. Most were simply confused about how such a thing could happen. Ji-won sat in her dormitory room while Mirai chattered excitedly. Everyone is talking about you. You're famous. That was the most amazing thing I've ever seen. I just answered the question, Ji-won said quietly. You did more than that. You stood up for humanity. You showed them we matter. A knock came at the door. Mirai opened it to find Torin standing in the hallway. The Rexian looked uncomfortable, his blue skin darker than usual. I need to speak with Ji-won, he said. Mirai looked at her roommate, who nodded. Mirai left them alone, closing the door behind her. Torin stood awkwardly for a moment. Then he spoke. I owe you an... 3 years passed like a breath held too long and finally released. Lieutenant Ji-won Kim stood on the bridge of the CFS Indomitable, a Confederation warship that cut through space like a blade through water. She wore the uniform of a tactical officer now, her simple braid replaced by a more practical shortcut. Her face had lost some of the softness of youth, replaced by the harder edges of experience. The bridge crew was mixed, as all Confederation vessels were. Humans worked alongside Kryn warriors, silicate navigators, and Vrexian weapons specialists. At the communication station sat Lieutenant Murray Park. her fingers dancing across holographic controls as she monitored fleet channels. And at the tactical station next to G1 stood Lieutenant Toran. He had kept his word. After graduation, he requested assignment to human-led units. For 3 years, he had served alongside the species he once dismissed. He had learned their ways, their tactics, their stubborn refusal to accept impossible odds. Captain Dongyun Lee commanded from the central chair. He was 40 years old, a veteran of New Seoul and a dozen other conflicts. His voice was calm as he studied the tactical display floating before them. Status report. 5 enemy battle groups detected, Jiwan said, her voice steady. Ravager horde configuration. Approximately 70 vessels total. They're moving toward the Stargate. The Stargate hung in space before them like a massive ring of light and metal. It connected this remote system to the core worlds of the Confederation. Billions of civilians lived on the other side. If the Ravagers took control of the gate, they could pour through like water through a broken dam. The Indomitable was part of a small battle group. 14 ships total, against 70. Fleet Command is signaling, Mirai said. Orders incoming. Everyone on the bridge knew what the orders would be. They had known since the Ravager fleet appeared on long-range sensors an hour ago. The math was simple and brutal. 14 ships could not hold against 70. Not for long. Maybe not at all. The message appeared on Captain Dongyun's display. He read it in silence. Then he looked up at his crew. High Command orders us to fall back to the secondary defensive line. We are to abandon the Stargate and regroup at the Thandros system. The bridge fell silent. Toran was the first to speak. If we fall back, the Ravagers take the gate. Yes. And then they have a direct route to the inner colonies. Yes. How long before they can organize an invasion fleet? Jiwan asked. Captain Donghyun's face was grim. Intelligence estimates 3 weeks. 4 billion civilians in the systems beyond this gate would have less than a month to evacuate. Host won't make it out in time. Mirai's voice was quiet. So we're just leaving them? That is our order. The captain stood from his chair and walked to the main viewport. Beyond the transparent metal, the Stargate glowed. Beyond that gate, entire worlds waited, unaware, unprepared, trusting that the Confederation would protect them. Captain, Toran said carefully, when I studied at the Academy, I learned about a human battle. The Chosen Reservoir. Surrounded forces facing certain destruction. They were ordered to retreat. But they didn't, Jiwan said softly. No, they fought their way out instead. They held their positions and made the enemy pay for every meter of ground. Toran looked at the captain. That battle became legendary. Not because they had superior forces, but because they refused to abandon the ground they were sworn to protect. Captain Donghyun turned to face his bridge crew. Are you suggesting we disobey a direct order from Fleet Command? I'm suggesting, Toran said, that I've spent 3 years learning what it means to serve with humans. And I've learned that sometimes the right choice is not the logical one. Sometimes you have to stand even when standing seems impossible. Other officers on the bridge shifted. The alien crew members exchanged glances. This was mutiny they were discussing, disobeying direct orders from the highest levels of Confederation military command. Lieutenant Park, the captain said. What's your assessment? Mirai swallowed hard. Sir, my family lives in the inner colonies. New Seoul. If the Ravagers take this gate, they'll be in the first wave of the invasion. I know we can't win this fight. But I also know that 3 weeks isn't enough time to evacuate 4 billion people. Lieutenant Kim, Jiwon met her captain's eyes. My grandfather once held a frozen mountain position with outdated weapons against an enemy force 10 times his size. They told him to retreat. He refused, because the people behind him deserved someone willing to stand. She gestured at the tactical display showing the massive enemy fleet. We have fusion cannons, energy shields, the best warship in the Confederation fleet. We're not standing on a frozen mountain with metal rifles. What's our excuse if we run? The captain was quiet for a long moment. Then he smiled. It was a small smile, almost sad, but filled with pride. Helm, delete that retreat order. All hands battle stations. His voice carried through the ship's communication system. This is Captain Lee. Fleet Command has ordered us to fall back. We will not be following that order. Instead, we will hold this Stargate against enemy forces until reinforcements arrive, or until we are destroyed. I will not ask anyone to stay against their will. Anyone who wishes to evacuate may do so now via shuttle. No judgment. No consequences, he paused. For those who stay, we fight for the 4 billion people who don't know we're here. We fight because sometimes standing is all you can do. We fight because that's what humanity taught the Confederation, that warriors don't run when the odds are bad. We dig in and make the enemy wish they had never come. The bridge crew looked at each other. Humans and aliens, species that had once fought each other now serving side by side. No one moved toward the shuttle bays. All stations reporting ready, sir, G1 said. No one is leaving. Then let's give the Ravagers a history lesson. The Battle of Stargate Threshold began at dawn, if dawn had any meaning in the void of space. The Ravager fleet moved forward in standard assault formation. 70 warships against 14. They expected easy victory. Expected the Confederation battle group to run as logic dictated. Instead, the Indomitable and its sister ships held position around the Stargate. Weapons charged, shields at maximum, and they waited. When the Ravager fleet entered firing range, Captain Dong-hyun gave the order. All ships engage. The void lit up with weapons fire. Plasma cannons. Fusion torpedoes. Energy beams that could slice through metal like paper. The Confederation battle group fought with precision and desperate courage. The Indomitable took the lead, its heavier armor allowing it to absorb damage meant for smaller ships. G1 coordinated defensive positions, moving their forces to protect each other. Torin controlled weapon systems with accuracy that surprised even him. Mirai kept communication channels open, calling out enemy positions and coordinating with other ships. The first day was chaos. Ships danced through space in patterns of death and survival. The Ravager fleet expected an easy fight but found determined resistance. They lost ships, more than they anticipated, but they kept coming. By the second day, the Confederation battle group was down to 11 ships. The Indomitable had taken heavy damage. Hull breaches in 3 sections. Main reactor operating at 70%. Crew casualties mounting. But the Stargate remained secure. The Ravagers could not break through. On the third day, everything changed. A massive energy blast struck the Indomitable's engineering section. The ship shuddered violently. Lights flickered. Emergency systems activated across the bridge. Reactor core damaged, the engineering officer reported. We're losing containment. Life support is failing in sections 4 through 7. Can we reroute? Captain Dong-hyun demanded. Not from here. Someone needs to manually operate the controls in those sections. But without life support, they'll die. G1 finished quietly. The captain stood. I'll go. Sir, no. Torin moved to block him. The ship needs its captain. I'll go. You're needed at tactical. Then I'll go, Ji-won said. I can operate those controls. Before anyone could argue, she was moving. She grabbed a void suit from the emergency locker and began putting it on. The suit would provide oxygen and protection from the cold of space, but it was bulky and limited movement. Ji-won. Mirai's voice stopped her. You might not come back. I know. Ji-won sealed her helmet. But someone has to stand. Someone always has to stand. She cycled through the airlock and entered the damaged sections. The cold hit her immediately, even through the suit. The sections had decompressed, all air vented into space. Debris floated in zero gravity, the bodies of crew members who hadn't reached safety in time. Ji-won pushed through the destruction to reach the manual control station. Her gloved hands worked the mechanical overrides. Rerouting power, stabilizing the reactor. It was slow work. Outside, she could hear the muffled sounds of weapons fire as the battle continued. Reactor stable, she reported through her helmet comm. But I can't get the automated systems back online from here. Can you operate weapons manually? Captain Dong-hyun asked. Ji-won looked at the backup control panel. Yes, but I'll have to stay here. The moment I leave, the systems will fail again. Understood. Stay at your post, Lieutenant. And so Ji-won fought the rest of the battle from a frozen, depressurized section of the ship. Her fingers worked manual controls that should have been obsolete decades ago, firing weapons, adjusting shields, while the